Okay, so just to catch everyone up on what this class is about, it's called I Will, and it's about developing some habits and characteristics of an outwardly focused Christian. So Christians who are thinking about serving and about our community, and it's not just all about me, it's about others. So there's a book by this same title by Tom Rainer, which I'm encouraging you guys to get, but you don't have to in order to get a lot out of this class. What I'm going to try and do is kind of walk through that book and highlight the big principles from it. If that inspires you to want to go out and get the book and read more, that's great. But if not, we'll try and cover the big points of it. So last week, what we talked about was the blessing of big church and little church, small church. Do you guys remember that conversation? Big church is what happens in our auditorium, our worship center, with singing together with hundreds of people, taking communion and hearing the word and praying together. It's a really big setting, and there's a lot of strength in numbers. There's a lot of good that happens there. But what the research shows is that Christians who only do big church but don't have some sort of smaller group or ministry that they're a part of, they don't tend to stay involved in church as well as people who have big church and a class, a ministry, people who really get to know them. So there's a lot of good that happens there, but that tends to be monologues. And then in smaller groups, you get to have dialogues and conversations and deeper relationships. So we really need both. And in a sense, I'm preaching to the choir on that because you all represent the Christians who not only do big church, but you're here for Bible class before church even starts. You all kind of already identify it's important to be part of some sort of smaller group, some sort of class where we can dive a little bit deeper. So I know I'm sort of preaching to the choir a little bit, but it still needs to be said, and we still need to articulate the importance of having those smaller groups that we can be part of. Also, we're recording this class and posting it on our church's YouTube channel, and I'm hoping that maybe some people who are listening online will maybe kind of get a greater awareness of the value of being present with a smaller community as well. So that's kind of what we talked about last week. Acts 2 was our main passage about being devoted to the community of faith. We talked a little bit about, when you have a preference-driven commitment to your church, what it looks like and sounds like is, I really like this church because it's meeting my needs, and I like the worship style, I like the sermons are not too long, or that the communion bread is nice and fresh. Basically, I love the way that this church works because it fits for me and it meets my needs. And I'm going to be committed to that church as long as it continues to match my preferences and meet my needs and do the things I like in the way that I like them done. And that's very different than a commitment that says, God has called me to be a part of this body of believers. Not because it meets my needs, but because I have something to contribute. Because these are the people that God has placed in my life to pour into. And even though I'm not exactly 100% sold on the way that they do worship or the programs that they offer, this is my church family, and I'm going to be here. So the commitment there has less to do with what the church can do for you, and instead a sense of being called to invest in this particular body of believers. I would love to be at a church where we all sort of naturally gravitate towards that commitment driven. But I know that Satan's at work in our hearts, and he's going to try and get us to gravitate back towards that preference driven attitude. So that's just something that we are going to be working on together. Today, the topic comes from chapter 4 of the book, I Will, and the topic is I will serve. And really, it's not just like serving against your will, like with a horrible attitude, like being coerced into serving. So it's like volunteer versus voluntold, right? It's two very different things. Volunteer is like you are choosing to do it. Other times it's like, hey, good news. Thanks for being here at worship today. You're reading scripture, right? So you're voluntold. This is what's happening in your life. So it's not just serving, but really finding joy in serving others. So one of the goals that we can be working towards as followers of Jesus is using our gifts to glorify God and to bless others. So we'll share a few passages today, but the main one that I hope will resonate with you is 1 Peter 4, 7 through 11. You can turn there now if you'd like. So, okay, we've recapped what happened last week, big church, small church, preference-driven attitude, commitment-driven attitude, and then kind of introduce this topic. Has anyone ever heard of St. Augustine or Augustine of Hippo, church father? Pretty smart dude. very influential, especially in the Catholic Church, very influential in the Christian world. So he talks a lot about love, about following God, having the right heart. And I want to share a quote from him about maybe what love looks like. So he starts with this rhetorical question. What does love look like? It has the hands to help others. It has the feet to hasten to the poor and needy. It has eyes to see misery and want. It has the ears to hear the sighs and sorrows of men. That is what love looks like. So what we're going to talk about today is that attitude of I am going to use the things that God has given me to love and to serve and to bless others. There's a lot of good things that the church can do for you, especially if you are the one who is poor and needy and feeling like you're going through tragedies. If you are in that season of life where you need someone to pour into you, that's why the church is here. But when life is going well, and when your cup is full, there's an expectation that we would take that blessing and pay it forward to others. So that's kind of the big idea today. In chapter 4 of this book, Tom Rainer tells the story of a woman named Heather. Does anyone who read chapter 4 remember Heather's story at all? She was in the introduction, and then Tom Rainer comes back to her story in chapter 4. So let me give you a little short version of her story. Heather's story begins in the introduction, and what happened was she and her husband had been part of this church for a really, really long time, and they had family connections to the church, and for a while things were going really well. Well, unfortunately, Heather and her husband got divorced. The ex-husband was getting remarried, and they were both going to stay at Heather's church. So Heather kind of saw the writing on the wall and said, it's probably time for me to find a new church, because I don't want to stay at the one where my ex-husband and his new wife are going to be at. But it was hard on the one hand because she had so many relationships there and been there a really, really long time. And so she not only was losing the marriage, she was losing the church family that she was part of. But she talks about how it actually wasn't as hard as you might think because she started getting really burned out at that church. There was something about it that was just really, it wasn't meeting her needs. It wasn't what was good for her. What she kind of realized was she was at a church that was the I want church, where the vast majority of people showed up expecting to have their needs met, their preferences matched. They just showed up expecting to receive. And the way that she talks about it is really interesting. She talks about it as it's like eating dessert for every meal, which sounds great until you start experiencing the really awful health effects of eating constant sugar all the time. It's fun, it's enjoyable, but it's not good for you at all. So she was at an I Want church, and it's actually the same church from our very first class together. I told that story of the pastor who wanted to change the worship time from like 10:30 to 10 or 11 to 10:30, like a 30-minute shift. And then the lady raises her hand and says, "Why are you always talking about people who aren't even part of this church? This is our church and our needs come first." And so then the pastor was like, forget it. Forget I even said anything about trying to make this church better for visitors. Forget it. That pastor didn't stay there very long. He saw the writing on the wall about what kind of church that was. So she, as hard as it was to have to sort of leave that church, it was actually an unexpected blessing, because several years later she found a new church, and she met with the pastor and the pastor's wife and started talking about her negative experiences with church. And she started rattling off like all the things that she saw wrong with the church, about why she kind of didn't go to church for about 4 years after that. And it was, well, the church wasn't, they didn't have a good kids program, and the building was dirty, and everyone was selfish. It was like, here's all the reasons what the church is doing wrong. And then the pastor's wife looked at her and said, it sounds like your whole attitude here is I want. What if you approach church and had the attitude of I will, like I will serve, I will help, I will bless others? And that's what made the difference for her. So now she's at a church that she really loves. What she loves about it is that everyone has that attitude of we're here not just to be served, but to serve others and to use our gifts to kind of pay God's blessings forward. So it's just a very different attitude. Did you have your hand up, or was that a stretch? Okay, just want to make sure. I didn't want to overlook you if you had something to say. So here was the way that she described this key difference. This is a quote from the book. I've got this quote printed on your handout on the second page now if you'd like to read along with it. So I've been trying to figure out, this is Heather talking, I've been trying to figure out the difference between the two churches, the old one and the new one. When I was at my old church, and they say the name of it in the book, but I just want to clarify. When I was at my old church, it was like eating dessert all the time. You enjoy it for a while, then you eat too much of it and get sick. You long for real food. Church was all about me, myself, and I. And frankly, I just got sick of being so self-serving. Tom Rayner chimes in here. The change in Heather was noticeable to herself and to others. I just find so much joy in serving others, she said. That's how most of the members are at my church now. We don't serve in ministry because of some legalistic guidelines. We serve because we are motivated by joy to do so. So it's a difference of an I want church and an I will church. And you might think that being at that I want church where it's all about you all the time would be better, but it's, like she said, it's like eating dessert all the time. You might enjoy it for a time, but it's not going to be what you really need long term. So the key here for her was finding a church that motivated her to serve and not be served, where there was a collective attitude that we are here to contribute and not just receive. So any thoughts, questions, or comments so far just on Heather's story and the two churches? Does that resonate with you guys at all? Do you feel like you've been at a dessert church? Do you feel like Southwest is a dessert church? This is kind of just open-ended question right now if you guys have any thoughts or feedback so far before we move on.
Well, Connie's favorite passage is the one you have printed at the end there, and that's Galatians 6:9, which states, never grow weary of doing good.
Yeah.
There's a bridge passage to that in 2 Thessalonians 3:13 that says, do not grow weary of doing what is right, which to me is a reference also to what you're talking about with that James about taking care of the orphans, the widows, the downtrodden, the poor, and serving. In other words, what's doing right is what's doing right, is action, is putting your faith into action and not sitting on your hands for an hour every week.
Yeah. Jeff?
I find from my experience, it's harder to have the I want mentality if you are invested in relationships with people in the church that you're in.
I could see that.
It's easy to be in I want when everything's very surface and shallow, and there's very reasons for that. People's busy schedules, time, but I find that when we lean in a little bit, it becomes you stop focusing on those little things.
Yeah. Good. Joan?
I find that actually it's a choice you make, whether you serve or whether you want to be served. Because even if there's not a program already set up, if there's something in your heart that you can serve, you can do it. You can begin a service if necessary.
Yeah, and let me just clarify on that point. When Tom Rayner talks about service, and when I talk about serving, I'm not necessarily saying come to a church event and volunteer at that, although that is one way to serve. It could be go do something awesome for your neighbors or your coworkers. It doesn't have to fall under the umbrella of Southwest Church of Christ for it to be service. And in fact, as awesome as it is to have official programs at the church, that takes time, it takes announcements, it takes resources, and it's slow. There's a lot of things that you could do today that it would take the church 2 or 3 weeks to kind of ramp up. So it's not just serve at an event, it is find a way to love your neighbors, whether or not it falls under the umbrella of Southwest Church of Christ.
It's almost like the spiritual world is a mirror of this world. Like, you can't prove it with our science or whatever, but if you we say, we need to watch out for ourselves, and that'll make us healthy, right? And that'll make us good. And if you push into the mirror that is the spiritual world, when we start helping others, we get happier, we get better, we get right. And again, we go, well, that doesn't make any sense. But that whole getting out of myself helps me, and we sense it, right? My wife can sense when I'm not well, even when she can't see it, right?
Yeah. It's a different value system. The way of Jesus is very different than the way of the world.
And then what comes naturally, right? Like
Yeah.
you were mentioning, when we're out of ourselves, when we're into the other world, we want to do the things that are helping those around us.
Yeah.
It's not a chore like it is when we're in our world.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let me share this right here. In chapter 4, he mentions 2 passages about serving others. You can write these down if you'd like. Snap a picture of that, whatever you like to do. Matthew 20 through 28 is one of the ones he talks about where the disciples and their mom are arguing about who gets to be seated next to Jesus in all of his glory. And that turns into this argument amongst the disciples about, why do you think that you're going to be great? Who do you think you are? And Jesus says, okay, guys, let's slow this down. Here's what it means to be great. If you want to be great, if you want to be lifted up, if you want to be an awesome follower of God, then learn to be a servant. Learn to be a slave. And Jesus says, Jesus, didn't come to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for everyone. So if you want to be great, learn to be a servant. The other passage that Tom Rainer mentions is Philippians 2, 1 through 11, which we've read in this class already. He comes back to it a lot because it resonates very well with the overall theme of the book. That's the one that talks about don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in others. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Consider others better than yourselves. In your attitudes with one another, have the same attitude that Jesus had, who being in the very nature of God, he goes through all that of God, Jesus humbling himself and taking on the form of a human, but then as a human humbling himself and taking on the form of a servant, and then as a servant humbling himself and becoming obedient to death on the cross, so that God could lift him back up and offer salvation to the whole world. But it's the idea of imitating the sacrificial spirit of Jesus. Those are the 2 passages that he uses. But I would add the 1 Peter 4 passage that I mentioned at the beginning. Because of how well it talks about everyone has received a gift from God, and because we have received a gift, now there's an expectation that we would share that gift with others. So 1 Peter 4, 7 through 11 says, "The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and of sober mind so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen." What are the big principles that you're hearing from these words? Peter is sharing this with the church. What are the big principles that you're hearing from this passage?
The thing that stuck out to me was if anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides. It's not about our weaknesses or our limitations. I think so often we think, oh, that's not within my scope, my ability, or I don't have time for this, or, my current plate feels heavy with whatever I have going on in life, and it's really not about any of those things. If we're serving in the way that God wants us to serve, he's going to provide us with the capacity to do whatever it is that we need to do.
That's right. It's not about our strength or what we bring to the table. It's about recognizing the strength that God is giving us and relying on that to do the work God is calling us to do. Very good. What else? Other big principles that you're hearing from this passage? Jeff?
Well, it's also about acknowledging where, piggybacking off of the strength thing, where do our blessings, where does our strength, where do our abilities come from? We can serve and throw ourselves into service and can very dangerously get to the point to where, well, I do all these things. I put all this time in, now I deserve X.
Yeah.
And so we forget about God's blessings in our lives and seeing the blessings from service. Because at the end of the day, it's about relationships. Why would he say offer hospitality if it isn't about relationships?
Yeah. It's easy to turn God, church, whatever, into a vending machine where I work really hard. I've invested myself. I've contributed And so now I expect the reward from it. And then we get really mad when it doesn't dispense it the right way and we start hitting the vending machine. What's wrong with you? I've put in my time, my money. I've been a faithful Christian at this church for, whatever. And then we get upset that there's not a tangible blessing that comes back. The blessing is in the service. And if God chooses to bless you with something on top of that, great. That's between you and him. But we don't serve in order to receive. We serve because we've already been given something.
I think that's in human nature. I mean,
Yeah, it is.
we go back to Job, right? And his friends looked at what was going on with him and just figured, you didn't put the quarters in the machine. Of course you're not getting back, right? You must have shoved some dirt in there. Of course you're getting out, right? And that's just the way we look at things, right? It's why we go, when we are talked with people about the service of, and how you can't really love without Christ's love. But then you look at all these secular donation things, and but look at all these people that aren't Christians that are doing good things. Yeah, but they're doing good things with false motivations. With, it's not this. I love to help, right?
Yeah.
It's,
I'm going to move on just a little bit. I shared some thoughts about this passage on your handout, and I'd like you to spend a little time just reading this, reflecting on this passage this week. But I wanted to get to the next kind of question, because here's my sense. Most Christians know I'm supposed to serve. Most Christians probably don't serve and give of their time as well as they could. Tom Rainer says it's probably about 2 out of every 3 Christians aren't necessarily serving consistently or giving sacrificially. There's room to grow there. So there's this gap between what Christians know they should do and what's actually happening, which is not as many Christians are serving as we would like to see. And so the question is, if we know that's what we should be doing, why aren't we actually doing it? What are the roadblocks? And I would say that there's kind of like a really cool dysfunctional triangle that contributes to that. And it's everyone's fault, basically. There's enough blame to go around for all of us, so we don't have to blame any one person or thing. There are certain things that are true, like on a congregational level about the church in general, that contribute to Christians like not volunteering, not serving. There are certain things that the leaders do, like the staff, ministers, elders, people who are responsible for overseeing things. There's things that they either do or don't do that contributes to Christians not serving. And then the individual people, there's things that could be happening in their lives that contribute to that too. You guys remember the first sin, Garden of Eden? Adam and Eve. God shows up after the sin, and he's kind of like, hey, what happened? What's going on here? What was everyone's sort of first gut reaction when God said, hey, what happened? What's this move right here? They did it. Yeah. Oh, the woman, right? The woman, it was probably her fault. And the woman was, the serpent or the man. Or it's like everyone is this. Everyone is pointing outward, and no one is saying, it was on me. Here's what I did. Here's how I contributed to it. So this is kind of a similar thing where why aren't Christians serving? The church and the leaders are probably like, well, it's our people. They're lazy. They're too busy. Their heart isn't in it. And then the individual members are like, well, our church doesn't know what it's doing. There's no mission. There's no vision. They're not communicating. Everyone kind of wants to blame someone else because that's human nature. So when we talk about these things, let's all look for the thing that we can take responsibility for. That's kind of what I'm saying here. On a congregational level, there's a lot of things that could be happening with the church as a whole that contributes to this phenomenon where Christians know they should be doing something but aren't doing much at all. One of them could be if the church lacks a compelling vision for here's what we're actually trying to do and accomplish. Here is what we feel God calling us to do and why it's important. When there's a lack of a compelling vision, there could be this event that always happens, like Monday card night, where everyone comes together and they write cards for people. You've done it for 30 years. No one really remembers why it got started or why we're trying to do it. No one really shows up for it. And so the elders and the ministers get up and be like, guys, we've been doing this for 30 years and no one just shows up. And I'm really disappointed in all of you that we can't get volunteers for card night. And no one knows who are we writing cards to and why are we doing this? What benefit happens? Are we sending these to our own members or someone else? There's like no vision for what that's trying to do. A compelling vision could be like, you know what, guys, there are so many Christians in our congregation that are no longer to worship with us in person, and they've meant so much to this church. We're going to commit to writing cards for all of them every week because we want them to know that they are loved and valued in the sight of Jesus. They're important to us, and we don't want anyone to get discouraged, especially later in life. We want to make sure that they walk the walk and finish the race well. So we would love to have some people come and join us as we write these encouraging cards to some of our older members. So that's a compelling vision of what the event is about and kind of how it ties into the calling that God has placed on the church. So if there's no vision, people are going to be like, why show up? I don't understand why this is important. Tell me the why behind it. Sometimes there's institutional barriers, like how come we can't find enough people to lead communion talks? And in some congregations, including Southwest, that's restricted to men only. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I am saying sometimes churches have like a policy that restricts who's allowed to serve. How come we can't get enough Bible class teachers? Well, maybe your church says you have to be a member of that congregation for 3 years and be a baptized member and have a Bible degree in order to teach a Bible class. That's an institutional policy that's really going to limit the number of people who can teach your classes. Another one could be like you've got 250 awesome Christians at your church, but you're not really setting any major goals. There's nothing really bold that you're trying to do. The only thing that you're trying to do is survive. And so the only thing we ever do is we have worship services. And that's it. So we've got all these people, but there's nothing really compelling, important, bold that we're trying to accomplish. So people are like, well, we're not doing anything. I can't volunteer because there's nothing that we're trying to do. So sometimes the goals are too timid, low expectations. Other churches are like, well, let's solve that problem. Let's just like do everything all of the time. There's something happening at church every week, and then they guilt trip people into not being at all of it. So then some people try and do everything. They get overscheduled, and the church burns people out by actually planning too much. So chances are, I don't know, a church is probably going to fall in between those two. The low expectations and the overscheduling. Another thing is that the church could just be really bad at developing volunteers. They look around and say, well, we don't have anyone who's already qualified to teach in the nursery class. We don't have anyone. I guess we better go back to that one person who always does it and make them do it again, right? Instead of saying, I wonder who we could train to be ready for this. So maybe the church is just really bad at developing volunteers. So that could be on the church level. I'll put myself and fellow leaders in the spotlight. Sometimes we are really bad at planning and organizing and communicating what the needs are. So there's things that need to get done, but we're just terrible at the logistics of getting that word out. Sometimes it's on us. Sometimes the existing leaders feel like they have to do everything, that if they don't do it, it's not going to get done. Or they can't get anyone, so instead of doing the hard work of recruiting volunteers, they're just going to go do it and burn themselves out. Sometimes the attitude is, well, why do we pay for staff if we still have to do the work of volunteering? That's why we have staff. We pay them so we don't have to do the thing, right? So sometimes leaders feel like everything gets pushed onto their plate because the members feel like that's why we pay you. Another really sort of trap that some ministers can get into is I, as a paid minister, want to make sure that I am absolutely indispensable to this church for job security purposes. I'm going to do as much as I can. I'm not going to train anyone else on how to do my stuff. That way the church can't get rid of me. So it's like a job security thing. And that's a real temptation for paid staff because so much rides on your continued employment. You have to make yourself look really valuable and indispensable. So sometimes it's like a necessity or an ego or job security thing. And then honestly, some people are really hard to work with. They're just kind of like jerks for Jesus sometimes. Where like they've got like this great heart to want to serve God, but they're just really rough personality-wise. And they have a hard time like recruiting a team and working with a team because they rub the team the wrong way. And people are like, forget it, I can't work with this guy. Or controlling, manipulative, toxic. Choose your favorite way of saying people really want to avoid them. So lastly, there are individual things. If individual members, if people, the average churchgoer is just too busy, then that can be an obstacle to serving. The bystander effect is when there's something that needs to happen at church. We need more volunteers for our 2- and 3-year-old class. and everyone looks around and says, there's no way I'm the most qualified person to do this. There's no way they really mean me. Well, I can look out in the room and see 10 other people that would be better at this. So I'm not going to volunteer because I know they really don't, when they say that, they really don't want me. And then play that conversation out with every other single person in the room. Everyone thinks there's got to be someone else who's better, so no one actually does anything. You're all standing around thinking, well, someone's going to take care of this. And then, yeah, it ends up being Shannon because no one wants to volunteer, right? Like, it's the one person. And so really the antidote to that is volunteer. And if it ends up not being a good fit, we will gently let you know, right? We will let you know and find a better place for you to serve. Members don't know where to plug in. I want to help, I just don't know where. And then sometimes it is that attitude of just, well, church is here for me. I want versus I will. Yeah.
I was going to say, so sometimes people want to do things, but then they're afraid of criticism, or they end up being criticized. And so, number one, we need to probably stop doing that, criticizing people when they're doing something. I mean, obviously, unless they need some re-education or some gentle prompting to do something different. But yeah, I think that falls into it as well.
Yeah. At the end of this chapter, he suggests, he kind of calls upon people to take this 90-day service challenge. So for 3 months, you don't complain about anything at church, and you try and eliminate all negativity, like in general. So that's already easy to say that, hard to do it, but that's the idea. So no complaining, no negativity, and then you commit to serving others for 1 hour a week. Again, not necessarily at a church event or program, but just serving others. So you're eliminating negativity and complaining. You're adding 1 hour of service. And he's like, just imagine if you got 100 people from your church to do that. The number of people times the number of hours and all the good that's going to come from taking that serving challenge. So, all right, we've talked about dessert versus real food, roadblocks to service, the 90-day service challenge. And then next week, we're going to do a little field trip to another book that Tom Rainer wrote. I mentioned this in our first class, Autopsy of a Deceased Church. He went and interviewed churches, leaders from those churches, members from the churches that closed. They were on slow decline. And then instead of changing in order to do, to kind of make some healthier choices and revitalize, they just died. They just chose to stay the same and die. So it's kind of like a what not to do when your church is sort of starting that decline. Really interesting, a little bit depressing, but also a wake-up call and good teaching on sort of what not to do. So we'll do that next week, and then we will continue on with the I Will book after that. All right, thank you for kind of letting me rush through this a little bit. I apologize. I did have to kind of get out of here a little bit earlier. So thank you guys for coming. Looking forward to worshiping with all of you here at 10. So, all right, see you guys soon.